August 17th, 1943. Sicily. General Dwight Eisenhower sat in his headquarters reading medical reports from 2 evacuation hospitals. 2 incidents, same general, 7 days apart. General George S. Patton had slapped a soldier. Then he had slapped another. Both were diagnosed with combat fatigue. One incident involved Patton pulling his pistol. Witnesses confirmed he had threatened to shoot the man. The reports sat on Eisenhower's desk for 3 days. He read them repeatedly. His chief of staff asked what he planned to do. Eisenhower picked up his pen and began writing. The letter would be marked personal and confidential. It would never be sent through official channels. Only 3 copies would exist. What Eisenhower wrote in the next hour would determine whether Patton commanded troops again, whether the most aggressive American general would fight in France, whether personal conduct mattered more than combat effectiveness. The letter began, "I am well aware of the necessity for hardness and toughness on the battlefield." It ended with a threat that would haunt Patton for the rest of his life. August 3rd, 1943, the 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia, Sicily. Patton was visiting wounded, standard procedure for senior commanders. He moved through the ward speaking with soldiers who had been hit by German fire. He asked about their wounds. He offered encouragement. He shook hands. Then he encountered Private Charles Cool of the 26th Infantry Regiment. Cool sat on a bed, no visible wounds, no bandages, no blood. He was shaking. His hands trembled. He stared at nothing. Patton stopped. He asked what was wrong. Cool looked up. He said, "I guess I can't take it." Patton's face changed. His voice went cold. He asked what Cool meant. Cool repeated, "I can't take it anymore." Patton exploded. He called Cool a coward. He said he wouldn't have cowards in the same hospital as brave men who had been wounded in combat. He raised his hand and slapped Cool across the face with his gloves. The sound echoed through the ward. Other wounded soldiers turned to look. Medical staff froze. Patton shouted at the medical officers. He ordered them to remove Cool from the facility immediately. He said the man didn't belong in a hospital. He belonged at the front. Then Patton turned and walked out. He visited other wards. He spoke with other wounded. He returned to his headquarters as if nothing had happened. Behind him, medical officers stood in shock. Lieutenant Colonel Perrin Long examined Cool. The private had chronic dysentery. His temperature was 102 degrees. He had been in continuous combat for 3 weeks. The diagnosis of combat fatigue was legitimate medical assessment. Long documented the incident. He filed a formal report. The report detailed Patton's behavior, the assault, the orders to remove a legitimately ill soldier from medical care. The report went up the chain of command. It reached 7th Army headquarters. Then it went to Allied Force headquarters in Algiers. It arrived on Eisenhower's desk on August 16th. Before Eisenhower could respond, a second report arrived. August 10th, 1943, 7 days after the first incident. The 93rd Evacuation Hospital near Sant'Agata. Patton was visiting wounded again. Same routine, moving through wards, speaking with soldiers, offering encouragement. He encountered Private Paul Bennett of the 17th Field Artillery. Bennett sat on a bed, no visible wounds. He had been admitted for psychoneurosis anxiety state. His unit had been under sustained German artillery bombardment. The shelling had been continuous for days. Bennett had broken. Patton asked what was wrong. Bennett said, "It's my nerves. I can't stand the shelling anymore." Patton stared at him. Then he moved fast. He slapped Bennett across the face, Once, the sound was sharp and loud. Bennett recoiled. Patton slapped him again, harder. Then Patton reached for his hip. He pulled his ivory-handled pistol from its holster. He waved it in Bennett's face. He shouted that he should shoot him right here for cowardice, that men like Bennett didn't deserve to live while brave soldiers were dying. Medical staff moved. They positioned themselves between Patton and Bennett. A nurse grabbed Patton's arm. Officers stepped forward. Patton holstered the pistol. He turned and walked out of the hospital. The ward was silent. Bennett sat shaking. Medical staff looked at each other. Colonel Donald Currier immediately filed a formal complaint. He documented every detail: Patton's arrival, the slapping, the drawn pistol, the threats. The behavior violated military law. It violated standards of officer conduct. It was criminal assault witnessed by dozens of people. The report went to 7th Army headquarters, then to Algiers. It reached Eisenhower on August 17th. Eisenhower now had 2 formal complaints, 2 separate incidents, 2 witnesses' accounts, 2 medical officers demanding action. He had to decide what to do with the general who had just won Sicily. Eisenhower sat in his office with his chief of staff, Major General Walter Bedell Smith. Smith's recommendation was immediate and clear: fire Patton. The incidents were indefensible. Patton had assaulted enlisted men. He had threatened to execute a soldier seeking medical treatment. He had violated laws designed to protect subordinates from abuse. If the incidents became public, the political damage would destroy both Patton and Eisenhower. Better to remove Patton now, issue a statement that disciplinary action had been taken, control the narrative before reporters discovered what happened. Eisenhower listened. Then he disagreed. He needed Patton. 7th Army had just completed the Sicily campaign in 38 days. 200 miles of combat advance, reached Messina before Montgomery's 8th Army. German commanders feared Patton more than any other Allied general. The invasion of France was being planned. Future operations would require commanders with Patton's aggressive instincts, his ability to exploit breakthrough, his willingness to take risks. Patton was irreplaceable. But Eisenhower also understood he couldn't ignore what had happened. 2 incidents, witnesses, formal complaints from medical officers. The incidents violated everything the American military claimed to stand for. Eisenhower made his decision. He would reprimand Patton severely, force him to apologize publicly, impose enough punishment to satisfy basic standards of accountability, but he would not fire him. Smith asked if Eisenhower understood the risk. If the incidents became public, keeping Patton would create a political firestorm. Eisenhower said he understood, but military necessity required keeping effective commanders. He would manage the political consequences. He picked up his pen and began writing the letter. August 17, 1943. Eisenhower drafted the letter in his own hand. It was addressed to Patton personally, marked personal and confidential. 3 copies would be made, 1 for Patton, 1 for Eisenhower's files, 1 for General George Marshall in Washington. The letter began formally. Eisenhower acknowledged that battlefield command required hardness and toughness, that combat created extreme stress, that commanders had to maintain discipline. Then the tone changed. Eisenhower wrote that Patton's conduct was despicable, that the incidents had potentially subjected Patton to court-martial, that striking enlisted men was criminal behavior that could not be tolerated under any circumstances. Eisenhower detailed his requirements. First, Patton would apologize personally to Private Cool and Private Bennett. Second, Patton would apologize to the medical staff at both hospitals. Third, Patton would deliver public apologies to every division in 7th Army, not written statements, public speeches to assembled troops. Fourth, such incidents would never occur again. The letter concluded with the threat. Eisenhower wrote, "I assure you that conduct such as yours will not be tolerated in this theater, no matter who the offender may be." The meaning was clear. One more incident, one more loss of control, Patton would be relieved of command and sent home in disgrace. Eisenhower signed the letter. He sealed it. He sent it by courier to Patton's headquarters. The letter was delivered on August 19th. Patton read the letter in his headquarters. His aide watched his face turn white. His hands shook as he held the paper. The requirements were devastating. Public apologies to every division, standing before thousands of soldiers and admitting he had been wrong. The humiliation would be total. But Patton understood what Eisenhower was offering. The letter was protection, documentation that severe action had been taken. If the incidents became public, Eisenhower could point to the reprimand and the corrective measures. Patton was being saved at the cost of his pride. He began the apologies immediately. The first was to Private Cool. Patton visited him personally. The apology was brief and uncomfortable. Cool accepted it without comment. Private Bennett's apology was similar. Patton acknowledged his behavior had been wrong. Bennett later said Patton seemed genuinely sorry. The medical staff apologies were harder. Patton met with doctors and nurses at both hospitals. He admitted his conduct had been inappropriate. He said he had violated professional standards. Then came the division apologies. Patton traveled to every division headquarters in 7th Army, the 1st Infantry Division, the 3rd Infantry Division, the 45th Infantry Division, the 2nd Armored Division, every unit that had fought in Sicily. At each headquarters, troops were assembled, thousands of soldiers in formation. Patton stood before them and apologized. Officers who witnessed these speeches described Patton as subdued. His usual aggressive command presence was gone. He spoke quietly. He avoided eye contact. He delivered the apology and left quickly. The process took 2 weeks. Every division, every formation. The humiliation was systematic and complete. But the apologies worked. The incidents remained confined to military channels. No press coverage appeared. Soldiers who witnessed the apologies talked among themselves, but didn't contact reporters. Eisenhower's strategy was succeeding. Patton had been punished. The matter was resolved internally. The war continued. For 3 months. November 21, 1943. Drew Pearson's radio show. Pearson was the most influential columnist in America. His Washington Merry-Go-Round column appeared in hundreds of newspapers. His radio broadcasts reached millions of listeners. Someone had leaked the slapping incidents to him. Pearson revealed everything: the 2 hospitals, the 2 soldiers, Patton pulling his pistol, the threats to shoot men diagnosed with combat fatigue, Eisenhower's decision not to fire Patton despite formal complaints and multiple witnesses. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Newspapers across the country ran front-page stories. Patton slaps soldier became the biggest military scandal of the war. Editorial boards condemned Patton's behavior. Veterans organizations demanded his removal from command. Congress erupted. Senators called for Patton's immediate dismissal. Representatives questioned whether Patton was fit to command American soldiers. Committee hearings were scheduled. The War Department was flooded with letters and telegrams. Mothers wrote that they wouldn't send their sons to war if generals could abuse them without consequences. Veterans wrote that Patton had disgraced the uniform. Secretary of War Henry Stimson was called to testify. He was asked directly, "Why is Patton still in command?" Stimson gave Eisenhower's answer. General Eisenhower had handled the matter appropriately. Patton had been severely reprimanded. Extensive corrective action had been taken. Military commanders had to balance disciplinary requirements with operational necessity. The explanation satisfied no one. The political pressure intensified. By late November, Eisenhower was receiving messages from Washington. General Marshall was being pressured by Congress. The Truman Committee was investigating. The scandal was threatening War Department appropriations. The message was clear. Patton had become a political liability. Unless the outcry subsided, he would have to be removed. December 1943. Eisenhower faced an impossible situation. Militarily, he needed Patton. Planning for Operation Overlord was accelerating. The invasion of France would require aggressive commanders for exploitation operations. Patton's combat effectiveness was essential. German intelligence monitored Allied command assignments obsessively. They knew Patton was the most dangerous American general. His location and assignment would provide critical intelligence about Allied intentions. But politically, keeping Patton was becoming impossible. Congressional pressure was overwhelming. Public opinion had turned decisively against him. The scandal was damaging the entire War Department. Eisenhower proposed a compromise to General Marshall. Remove Patton from command of 7th Army, strip him of his current position, but keep him in the European theater. Assign him to a planning role. Use him for the invasion when public attention had shifted. Marshall presented the compromise to Secretary Stimson. Stimson presented it to President Roosevelt. Roosevelt's decision: the compromise would work if Patton stayed quiet, if he avoided new scandals, if the press found other stories to cover. But if Patton created more problems, he would be sent home permanently. No second chances. Eisenhower implemented the plan in January 1944. Patton was relieved of 7th Army command. He was transferred to England. His official assignment? Special duties. The special duty was commanding a phantom army, the 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG. It existed on paper and in radio traffic. Inflatable tanks positioned in fields, plywood buildings painted to look like headquarters, radio operators transmitting messages that mimicked a massive army preparing for invasion, and Patton making public appearances, being photographed, ensuring German intelligence reported his presence. It was the ultimate use of Eisenhower's August letter. Patton had been saved from disgrace. Now his reputation was the weapon. German commanders believed Americans wouldn't waste their best general on a secondary operation. Wherever Patton was positioned indicated where the real invasion would come. Patton spent 4 months commanding inflatable tanks. He inspected fake installations. He held staff meetings with officers managing the deception. He was photographed visiting phantom units. It was humiliating, but it was also essential. German intelligence tracked Patton's location. They positioned their best reserves to face him. They concluded the main invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, where Patton was stationed. The deception worked because Eisenhower's letter had worked. Patton remained in command. His reputation remained intact enough to deceive German intelligence. The threat of removal kept him controlled. But the threat was always there. One mistake, one scandal, Eisenhower would send him home. April 25, 1944, Knutsford, England. Patton attended the opening of a welcome club for American soldiers. Local British officials invited him to speak. Press photographers were present. Patton made brief remarks. He welcomed cooperation between American soldiers and British civilians. Then he made a joke. He said it seemed evident that Americans, British, and Russians would rule the world after the war. Therefore, they should try to get along now. He didn't mention China, America's ally in the Pacific War. The comment was reported in American newspapers. The reaction was explosive. Why had Patton excluded China? Was he making foreign policy statements? Did generals decide post-war political arrangements? Congressional reaction was harsh. Senators demanded explanations. Representatives questioned Patton's fitness for command. The same politicians who had called for his removal after the slapping incidents had new ammunition. Eisenhower received the reports on April 27th. The invasion was 6 weeks away. The deception required Patton to remain visible and credible. A scandal resulting in his removal would undermine everything. German intelligence would notice if Patton was sent home. They would question whether Fusag was real. The entire deception could collapse. Eisenhower summoned Patton to his headquarters on April 29th. The conversation was brutal. Multiple officers documented it afterward. Eisenhower told Patton he was considering recommending his relief and return to the United States, that General Marshall was questioning whether Patton was worth the constant political problems, that the Knutsford incident, combined with the slapping scandals, demonstrated a pattern of poor judgment. Patton offered to resign. He said he would accept any consequences. Eisenhower let him suffer for several minutes. Then he explained the actual situation. The deception operation required Patton in England commanding Fusag. If Patton was sent home, German intelligence would know something was wrong. The operation that might save thousands of lives on D-Day would be compromised. Eisenhower was keeping Patton not because he deserved it, but because the deception required it. Patton would stay out of public view. He would make no more speeches. He would do exactly what he was told, nothing else. It was Eisenhower's August letter made explicit. The threat that had been implicit was now spoken directly. Patton's career existed at Eisenhower's pleasure. One more mistake, and it was over. Patton accepted. He returned to Fusag. He avoided public appearances. He waited. June 6, 1944. D-Day. Allied forces landed at Normandy. The invasion Eisenhower had been planning for 18 months was finally happening. George Patton spent D-Day in England, commanding inflatable tanks, watching other generals lead real soldiers into combat. But the deception was working perfectly. German intelligence still believed FUSAG was real. They still believed Patton commanded it. More importantly, German military commanders still believed the Normandy landing might be a diversion before the real attack at Pas-de-Calais. For 6 critical weeks after D-Day, German armored reserves remained near Calais, waiting for Patton, waiting for an invasion that would never come. The divisions that could have crushed the Normandy beachhead in its first vulnerable days remained frozen in place, because German commanders couldn't believe the Americans would leave George Patton out of the most important battle of the war. August 1, 1944. Third Army became operational in France. Patton finally received a combat command. What happened next validated everything Eisenhower had calculated. In the first 2 weeks of August, Third Army covered more ground than any Allied force had managed in 2 months of Normandy fighting. Patton's divisions raced through Brittany, then swung east toward Paris. German defensive positions that had held for weeks collapsed as Third Army appeared behind them. The Falaise Pocket encirclement in mid-August trapped hundreds of thousands of German soldiers. Third Army's northern thrust closed the pocket from the south. German losses exceeded 50,000 captured and 10,000 killed. By the end of August, German forces in France were shattered. Third Army had advanced farther and faster than any army in the European theater. Patton had proven himself exactly what Eisenhower believed, the most effective exploitation commander in the Allied forces. But the August 17th letter remained in Eisenhower's files. The threat was permanent. The power dynamic had changed forever. The letter stayed classified for years. Eisenhower kept it in his personal files. When he wrote his memoirs, he mentioned the slapping incidents briefly. He described the corrective action he had taken. He defended his decision to keep Patton in command. He never quoted the letter directly. When the letter was finally released to historians, it confirmed what senior officers had long suspected. Eisenhower had saved Patton while making absolutely clear who held power. The letter was protection for both of them. For Patton, it was documented evidence that he had been punished and had apologized. For Eisenhower, it was proof he had taken appropriate action. But it was also a weapon. Every decision Eisenhower made about Patton afterward referenced back to that letter. The FUSAG assignment, the response to Knutsford, the final removal from command in September 1945. The letter determined the rest of Patton's war. December 1945. Patton died from injuries sustained in a car accident near Mannheim, Germany. Among his personal effects was a copy of Eisenhower's August 17th letter. Patton had kept it. He had read it repeatedly over 2 years. In the margin, in Patton's handwriting, was a single word: necessary. He understood what Eisenhower had done, saved his career while establishing absolute control, used him as a weapon while maintaining the power to destroy him. The letter was never secret. It was always effective.